last 31 days. Automobile industry body SIAM has said that it expects passenger vehicle sales to slow to single digits, mainly due to falling demand. But the surprise is that it also expects commercial vehicle sales to remain on a strong footing, and the CV space is expected to do much better than what it had earlier projected. In all of this, we also have a spate of labour unrest at auto units across the country now, and that certainly seems to be hitting production and impacting growth of the sector. To discuss the impact of the labour situation on the growth of the sector going forward, we're now joined by Mr. SANDILYA, the president of SIAM. He's just taken over. Mr. SANDILYA, appreciate you joining us here on CNBC-TV18. Let me start by asking you, sir, about how concerned industry is with regards to the labour unrest, not just at Maruti but across various units. Auto ancillary units are seeing labour trouble. Bosch in Bangalore, for instance, is seeing labour trouble. Maruti, of course, has been seeing labour trouble now for the last 31 days. Is there an acknowledgement on the part of the industry that perhaps the principle of equal work for equal pay is not being followed?
See, one thing we should look at it from a labour unrest point of view. What is happening in the industry is not a welcome situation at all. Obviously, the Society of Indian Automobile Manufacturers is concerned about the developments. I cannot comment on the individual company's involvement or the situation which is there either in Maruti or Bosch for that matter, because that's company management and union related issues. But by and large, what one has come to see is that agreements reached between the management and the union or the workmen in the kind of bargainable category cannot be broken, and it cannot get into a law and order situation. And I think the union has a right to collective bargaining, discussions with the management to resolve their issues, which is a legitimate issue, but it cannot go beyond the boundaries and taking law into their hands. And that's what I think is more concerning to us, that instead of being a normal routine management union related issue, is going beyond that and crossing all boundaries of basic discipline and law.
I agree with you, sir, and I don't think anybody is condoning the fact that acts of violence have actually taken place within the premises of Maruti. But I don't want to make this about Maruti, because as I said, that this is an industry-wide issue. Mr. SANDILYA, is the auto industry not addressing the root cause of the problem? Perhaps what we're seeing as labour unrest in companies like Maruti and companies like Bosch, etc., are the symptoms, but the root cause of the problem is not being addressed, and the root cause of the problem seems to be the high percentage of temporary or contractual workers that we have. And we've spoken to several OEMs across the country. The ratio of contractual labour is as high as 50% in some cases, or perhaps even higher in smaller ancillary units, and these people are not getting paid the same wages or even close to the same wages that the permanent employees are getting paid. So is the industry not guilty of not acknowledging this fact and not addressing the root cause of the issue?
No, I don't agree with that perspective, saying that the industry is not looking at it. Let's understand the fundamental root cause of the whole thing. In our country, the so-called labour reforms that we've been talking about to making the recruitment and also retrenchment of labour an easy process has just not come about. We have been from the industry continuously saying that we need labour reforms. Let's understand the market fluctuations. The market does go through cyclical issues. There are certain peaks in production, there are certain shortfalls in production. How does a management of a company manage such situations in case there is substantial drop in volume? The company has no option but to reduce the number of workers who are deployed on the job, which is not possible. So therefore, the only route that the management can take is have a few people who are basic requirement in terms of permanent employment and manage the balance through temporary or casual workmen. And that's, I think, the root cause is that if the company had options by the way of labour reforms, that it can kind of in periods of crisis can manage the labour layoffs temporarily or take certain amount of measures, this kind of a thing would not have come about at all. Let's face the fundamental facts.
Mr. SANDILYA, I take your point. I take your point as far as not having the flexibility because we haven't been able to implement labour reforms. But what about the principle of equal pay for equal work, sir? Is that being followed? Because I'm going to quote to you, and unfortunately I cannot name the individual, but a very senior auto industry veteran who's worked in the passenger car industry for years now, and this is what he has to say. He says that Indian auto industry uses cheaper contract labour, often comprising of up to 50% of the workforce, which in turn decreases costs for the automaker by as much as 50%. I understand the inflexibility on the labour reform part, but what about addressing the other issue? If you're going to be doing the same work as a permanent employee, why should you not be paid the equal wages?
Well, understand that. I see, again, I cannot comment on what each company does or what companies would do. Normally, and I think my understanding of the experience is that people would pay at least the minimum wages, if not more. After all, it's a demand and supply situation. That when they do employ casual labor or contractual labor, they will have to pay the market rates that at least they can get the people. I mean, if they pay lower salary, they won't get even people at the contractual. Skill availability is a major problem in the industry. We are talking about skill development being given a high focus. Why? Because people are not available easily. So it is wrong to say that they're not being paid. Yes, a permanent labor who has been in the company for 15, 20 years would have had increases in his salary by virtue of increments over the last so many years. He would have all the other benefits like provident fund and others. A casual worker will get those benefits only after he completes certain number of period. So as per legal requirements, I don't think companies would be violating the basic principles of what they should pay to the people in terms of minimum wages which are required to be paid in the industry. But to say that they must be getting the same wages as a person who has worked in the company for 20 years is actually not at all from a fair perspective. But I can't comment on individual companies whether they're paying low or high, but I think in principle companies in the industry would pay wages according to the demand and supply, and they would definitely pay them a reasonable wage at which people are willing to work. It's a demand and supply situation.
Okay, I take your point, Mr. Sandilya. As the industry body, what are you planning to do about this situation? Because, you know, we're seeing it happen in the north, we're seeing it happen in the south. Is there going to be a concerted attempt on the part of SIAM to actually get industry leaders together to address this issue?
See, we cannot get into company situation on IR problems. That's not the association's viewpoint as well. However, we would definitely appeal to the various governments to look at how the whole situation can be managed in terms of discipline, both from the management perspective and from the worker perspective. There must be fairness in approach, and that's very critical. The management also will get a union that it deserves. I mean, I think if the approach has been fair over a period of time, the union also sees logic. There are n number of companies in which there have been labor troubles, people come back to work and then normalcy is restored. So I think it's purely company management versus labor issue, which SIAM cannot address from a company perspective, but from industry perspective, of course, we will take it with the government to ensure that overall law and order enforcement, overall principles of justice being followed, and whatever labor reform that are required to make the industry flexible, make it competitive. And I think industry has to be competitive. If it is not competitive, it doesn't have the kind of flexibility to manage its own resources. We will go the US way in terms of the companies. What happened to the auto industry in the US? It's the labor cost which drove all the auto industry down in the US. Let's not forget that. So we can't afford to have Indian industry going the same way and being uncompetitive in the whole situation. So I think we need to manage it in the
I understand, sir. Are you worried about that? That you actually preempted my question. That's what I was going to ask you. Are you worried now that the kind of money that India has seen coming in from foreign investors, setting up manufacturing facilities here in India, are you worried that foreign investors are going to be now wary of investing in the Indian auto sector, given the spate of controversy that this sector seems to be surrounded in on account of the labor unrest?
Yeah, if as a country we cannot manage relationships, we cannot manage the overall kind of unrest and law and order situation, obviously people will hesitate. Yes, people who have had plans to come into India because Indian economy is offering tremendous opportunity, the kind of population of cars per thousand, population of vehicles per thousand is extremely low, companies would be interested in investing money. But yes, they would like to have a peaceful environment to do so and have flexibility in operations. If the country cannot give them support, I mean, we have had instances where the labor force take law into their hands and started damaging people, I mean killing people. We have seen that in auto industry happening, in the auto ancillary industry. That kind of a thing is not tolerable at all. I mean, I think any country would not tolerate indiscipline amongst people to get into becoming danger for life and equipment of the organization. That's not fair at all. So to that extent we need to protect, but however I'm sure these things can be taken care of if the governments, state governments especially, address the issue and provide the right kind of support without losing the social focus of taking care of the workmen. I mean, obviously I'm not saying that they should do anything which is against the interests of the low income group, but there must be overall fairness in dealing with such issues.
Mr. Sandilya, appreciate you joining us here on CNBC-TV18, sir. Many thanks indeed for being candid and